But back stateside, Dr. Samuel Clowes Huneke is an award-winning associate professor of history at George Mason University, a historian of modern Germany. He is the author of numerous books and articles, including States of Liberation, Gay Men Between Dictatorship and Democracy in Cold War Germany, and A Queer Theory of the State. You can buy his books and learn more about his research at his website, samuelcleweshuneke.com, Clowes. He joins us monthly here on The Gaily Show. Sam, hello.
Hi, it's great to be back.
All right. Ding dong, the witch is dead. I've been waiting to say that all day.
Yes.
I wish that I could get the access to the music to play it, but ding dong, she dead. For folks who don't know, Kim Davis on Monday lost her lifelong quest, or at least her quest for 14 years now, I believe. No, 10 years. 10 years now.
10 years.
To overturn gay marriage or marriage equality in the U.S. And now she owes a hefty sum of money. Sam, can you break this down for us?
Yeah, so basically she had made a sort of long shot appeal to the Supreme Court to overturn the 2015 Obergefell ruling in which the justices mandated that marriage equality would be the law of the land. Kim Davis, who I believe is from Kentucky, she was a clerk, and she refused to issue marriage certificates to same-sex couples. And so that's what kind of landed her in this mess. That's where she had these fines from. And I guess it's been appealed since. I mean, I sort of had forgotten she existed until she launched this.
Rightfully so.
This long shot appeal to the Supreme Court. Given how this current Supreme Court, with its right-wing supermajority, has been treating precedent in these sorts of cases, there was, I think, real anxiety among queer people that they were going to take up this case and ultimately either overrule or hollow out that Obergefell ruling. And so this is a very welcome decision that the Supreme Court, in, as I understand it, unsigned, unreasoned sort of opinion, or it's not technically an opinion, but they rejected this case. They declined to take it up, and they didn't explain why or why not, which, again, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that typically when the Supreme Court declines to hear a case, they don't explain why they're declining to hear a case. And so I think we can at least read from this that at the moment, there is not an appetite on the court to revisit this particular cluster of rights.
Okay, that brings me a question here. And again, also not a legal scholar, so I don't know all of the ins and outs of her particular case. There were folks like GLAD, or the legal organization, that were GLAD, that were saying that this particular case, the court isn't going to take up because of what's happening right within the case, which to me, I was like, who cares? They're going to look for any, reason that they want. They're willing to just, shoot it all down, basically, at this point. Can we read it, though, as they didn't like this case and they still want to do it? Or can we say, maybe for now, they're all good? Because Amy Coney Barrett's on a book tour right now, or she's out giving interviews, and she's like, it is fine. We're not going to overturn it. And I'm like, yeah, you all lied under oath about Roe, so I don't trust anything that you say. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts about this. I think, first of all, abortion was a particular issue, right? I mean, abortion belongs to the same set of constitutional rights as, the right to contraceptives, the sort of broad right to privacy, the right to marriage equality. All of these are sort of under that kind of that umbrella. And Justice Thomas, when they overturned Roe v. Wade, explicitly in a concurring opinion said we should revisit all of these other cases. And no one else signed on to that opinion. So I think, we have to understand that abortion belongs to this broader set of cases, but was also a kind of particular obsession of the right. And they created this whole legal infrastructure to train a set of Supreme Court justices whose main purpose in being confirmed was to overturn this one ruling. And so I think we
can about it under oath.
Sure. Yes, of course. And they've done that, and they obviously have a whole host of other kind of right-wing originalist preconceptions about the law. But I think you actually do see some idiosyncrasies in terms of how they apply that. I mean, one of my favorite examples, of course, is Gorsuch and his deep commitment to indigenous rights, which is sort of mystifying. And let us also not forget that Neil Gorsuch wrote and I'm forgetting the name of the case, but several years ago, the case that extended workplace protections to queer and trans people. And so I think, and that came out of this sort of rigorous textualist understanding that if you ban discrimination on the basis of sex and you discriminate against someone because you don't like who they're having sex with, that pretty clearly, contravenes that. So uh, I guess I think that there's less of an appetite to revisit these other rulings. However, I think an important caveat is that basically ever since ruling in Obergefell, the Supreme Court has been willing to take cases that have progressively sort of weakened or hollowed out the institution of same-sex marriage, and basically said that even if a couple is married, it is still acceptable if you're claiming religious grounds to discriminate against them. And I think we haven't seen the end of those sorts of cases. I think we obviously still see a host of other attacks on queer and especially trans people that this court is unlikely to do anything to prevent and may very well find ways to egg on. You know, it, it I take this as a sort of welcome reprieve of a worst case scenario, but it doesn't mean that all of a sudden everything is fine and we can just sort of go about our business.
Well, to your point, the Texas Supreme Court just signed off unanimously saying that Texas judges do not have to conduct civil ceremonies, marriage ceremonies for queer couples if it violates their sincerely held religious beliefs, which
Right.
is amazing. But I have to fit in a break here. If you like what you're seeing, click subscribe on YouTube, give us a like, leave us a comment. If you are listening on the radio, none of this is possible without our sponsors and our advertisers. Do business with them. Tell them you heard about them on The Gailey Show on AM 950 Radio or WCPT 820. Stay tuned. More after the break. Welcome back.
Great to be here.
All right. I also just want to revel in the fact that Kim Davis has to pay $360,000 now. Like, she's been trying to get out of it for 10 years. And I'm pretty sure, just observing Kim, she probably doesn't have that.
No.
But, like, what happens now? Does she, like, her wage get garnished for the rest of
I
her
have
life?
no idea. You would have to talk to a lawyer. I'm blissfully ignorant of that area of the law.
All right. So I guess it's a wait and see on this court as it relates to marriage equality. Yeah, like for
Yeah,
now
I
we
mean,
have a reprieve.
I think that's right. It again, who's to say? But I think it's very likely that we'll see more cases that challenge whether or not other people have to be involved in same-sex marriages. So, for instance, this Texas sort of decision that officials don't have to perform civil ceremonies if it goes against their quote-unquote religious beliefs. I mean, the two, so I think it's likely that we'll see more cases like that. And I think that there will be an intentional effort to try and hollow out what it means to be married if you and your spouse are of the same sex. And to basically say, yeah, you can get married, but that doesn't really confer many other benefits. I would imagine that there would be efforts to, for instance, more systematically prevent gay couples from adopting or having kids. Perhaps in line with attacks on like IVF. So I certainly don't think we're somehow out of the woods. I think that this is both something that a lot of these Republicans and right-wing individuals, both inside and outside of the judiciary, find just personally kind of reprehensible or disgusting. But I also think that the Republican Party has shown that they are very happy to use queer and trans issues as political wedges when they think it's convenient. And so I worry that that will come back. I know you were just talking about this, but I also want to just emphasize again what a joy it was that Democrats did so well despite efforts to, attack them on trans issues. My understanding is that most of the candidates who did well had not sort of given in to the temptation to throw trans people under the bus. Mamdani, and of course, New York's a sort of different ballgame, but had campaigned in a gay club and
Hmm.
vocal about support for trans rights. And my hope is that maybe this election marks a kind of bit of a sea change that convinces politicians that queer and trans people are not simply political footballs to be tossed around.
Hmm. Well, he was also there was video of him at a trans rally in
Yes,
February when
yes,
there was like he was polling at like 1%.
right.
So he was there even when it wasn't politically expedient, and was also mentioning trans rights in his victory speech as well.
Yeah, and I think it strikes me that both Democrats and Republicans are guilty of this, and obviously Democrats
Mhm.
in a way that we like and support. But I think there's this idea that we can kind of distract from material issues, from economic issues, by talking about rights and sexuality and gender. And at the end of the day, I think most voters actually don't usually care, who is having sex with whom, or, what someone's gender expression is. I think most voters care about how the economy is doing. They care about whether or not they have health care. And I think, a good politician can sort of explain, listen, expanding rights to more people is ultimately a good thing in terms of your ability, you quote unquote normal voter, to live a kind of happy, fulfilled life. Um, but there's this sort of, I'm reminded, I have a very good friend who's from Wisconsin, and we talk politics all the time. He lives in Berlin, so whenever I'm over there, we talk about American politics, and he follows Wisconsin politics very closely. And I remember a few years ago, the last Supreme Court race that Democrats lost in Wisconsin, they tried to make it all about sort of gay marriage and gay rights, and it sort of failed. And I think that's sort of almost the same thing as Republican candidates in this election trying to attack trans people. It's like, no, just get back to talking about the economy and the kinds of things that matter in voters' day-to-day lives.
Hmm. How do I? There's something that mm, there are three think tanks, and I'm blanking on their names right now, folks. I'll find it posted on. I'm going to do a whole segment on it. Actually, there are three Democratic think tanks, and I know you and I we've commiserated about a certain popular governor from the West Coast,
Yes.
who are basically forcing Democrats to. They're saying very loudly that Democrats need to make a choice. You either win and stop talking about LGBTQ rights, and also maybe stop supporting some of them altogether, or you talk about them and support them, and you're going to lose.
Which is of course ridiculous. I mean,
Yes.
it just it never ceases to amaze me how there is a certain brand of centrist Democrat, both elected officials and the sort of people who exist in the kind of consulting think tank world, who are still like living in the 1990s, it seems, and thinks that there's sort of a center towards which they can triangulate. And if they, drop this policy that's too left leaning and adopt this policy that's just right leaning enough, then they're going to target that centrist voter and win elections. And it's just complete BS. These voters don't exist. I think most voters, in fact, care a lot more about voting for authentic candidates who actually believe in something. And that,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, when you triangulate, you say, well, we're going to strategically adopt some policies and strategically adopt other policies, it signals to voters that you actually don't believe in anything and you won't fight for anything. And in fact, I think we're seeing that kind of right now in the backlash that Senate Democrats are having to, voting to reopen the government, where I mean, I think there's just tremendous anger, both among other members in the Senate caucus, but also among voters who are basically saying, no, you were fighting for our ability to access quality health care. And now you're just surrendering, you're folding like a cheap house of cards. And for what? You've now put us through 40 days of pain, of real economic pain, for nothing.
Yep.
And I think that's precisely the kind of Democrat that also thinks, oh, well, we should probably get rid of these left leaning policies, whether it's trans rights, whether it's climate change. Whereas I think there are plenty of other very talented politicians, some who are quote unquote moderate, some who are more progressive, who are able to make a convincing case that no, all of these things matter to building a sort of functioning multiracial democracy in which working class people have the same kind of fair shot as everyone else.
I don't know if you're talking with your friend in Berlin, who's from Wisconsin, about Representative Christian Phelps, gay Democratic Socialist from Western Wisconsin.
Mm.
We had him on a couple weeks ago and blew my mind. This guy better be governor one day of that state. It's just, it's incredible, incredible what he's doing there.